Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Jacobson. I'm the president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, and thank you for joining our webinar today. We're going to focus on election outcomes and impacts on clean energy sectors. Before we get started, I wanted to request that everyone please keep your lines muted to avoid background noise. You can submit questions anytime by clicking on the chat button and sending a message to our host. We hope to be able to address some of the questions towards the end of the session. We are recording this webinar, and we will share the slides and recordings with all of you later this week. This is the fifth installment in the Powering Forward webinar series. It's put together in partnership with the Business Council for Sustainable Energy and Clean Energy Business Network. These webinars explore the unique impacts facing clean energy industries during the COVID-19 pandemic and the vital role our sectors will play in the economy's recovery. Each episode is produced collaboratively with partners working to advance clean energy, demonstrating that together we can power forward through this crisis to emerge as a stronger and more resilient America. And we're delighted to partner with this week's webinar with Bracewell's Policy Resolution Group. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, CRES Forum and Natixis Investment Managers, for supporting the production of this series. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy is a coalition of companies and trade associations from the energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy sectors. The Council advocates for policies at state, national, and international levels that increase the use of commercially available clean energy technologies, products, and services, and support an affordable, reliable power system, and importantly, reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. BCSC's members are shown here. Of note, BCSC released a set of recommendations for energy and climate change policy today. This will serve as a foundation for the BCSC's policy advocacy at state, local, and federal levels. I encourage you to check it out, and we'll also talk a little bit about this during the moderated discussion. Now my pleasure to introduce Lynn Abramson, President of the Clean Energy Business Network.
Hi there. So the Clean Energy Business Network serves as the small business voice for the clean energy economy, and we work to support more than 4,500 small and mid-sized businesses across the United States through policy support, market and technology education, and business development assistance. Lisa, could you advance to the next slide? So as I mentioned, we have more than 4,500 members across all 50 states, and they represent a very diverse range of technologies across the renewable energy, energy efficiency, natural gas, advanced transportation, storage, and other sectors. So I'll turn it back over to Lisa to introduce the rest of our panelists.
Yeah, before I do, I just want to highlight one of the initiatives the BCSC and CEBN do together. It relates to the Sustainable Energy in America Fact Book. And Lynn, I just want to commend CEBN and your members for the Faces Behind the Facts initiative, where we're really profiling these entrepreneurs and those on the front lines of the clean energy sectors. So I encourage all of our participants to check it out.
Yes, and please consider applying. We would love to feature a diverse range of technologies and geographies in this series.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get ready and get us started with a little context. So today's webinar features an overview presentation on the state of play of the U.S. elections by Liam Donovan. It will be followed by a panel discussion of industry experts. And our panelists include Emily Duncan, Chairman of the BCSC Board of Directors and Director of Federal Government Relations for National Grid US, Nanette Lockwood, Senior Director of Climate Policy and Advocacy at the Center for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability at Trane Technologies, Chris Matthey, Vice President of Government Relations for Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, Malcolm Wolf, President and CEO of the National Hydropower Association, and Jim Rathall, General Counsel for New Energy Equity, LLC. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Liam Donovan, Principal at Bracewell's Policy Resolution Group. Liam is going to share his perspectives on election scenarios, as well as offer comments on how it might impact the U.S. energy sector. Liam, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours, and we're going to transfer the opportunity to share your screen.
me, Lisa, to try to make sure the technical difficulties don't continue. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be back here. I think many of you have heard from me before. We sort of lived this together throughout the summer. I had to look back because it's COVID time, and I wasn't quite sure, but we talked back in June and again in August. And I think what's been interesting is just how steady this race has been so far. That's been the theme, and in some ways, this is the culmination. Back in June and August when we talked, I think I was hunkered down in my makeshift office basement, hoping that my kids didn't come into the frame or into the audio. And as we sort of thought of the conception of how a Trump comeback would start, it largely hinged on some return to normalcy and some sense that, whether we're sending the kids back to school or we're back in the office or things like that. And a week out, it seems pretty clear that that hasn't come to pass. I'm back in the office now for the first time in 7 months, stumbling through technical difficulties, but I think that underscores just how disrupted our lives have been and just how different this election is than most. And so I think that's just a good way to lead into the fact that this is a supremely steady race in a way that's not good for the president. I think in the last week of an election, 4 years after a pretty serious black swan, you might say, I think there's a tendency to overthink this race, and I would just commend you to stick to the fundamentals. The bottom line is this is an unpopular president who has never been net positive in his rating, 85%. Right now, depending on who you ask, it's between 43 and 44%. That is a reflection both of the fact that, but also if you look at the last New York Times poll, 48% have a very unfavorable view of the president. So whatever enthusiasm he might have on his side, whatever enthusiasm there might be among that 44, 45%, it's outstripped by people who are very enthusiastic about getting him out. The other piece of this is a once-a-century pandemic, as I said. That is the defining issue of this race, of this year, and the majority disapproves of Trump's handling of it. 2-1, they say the U.S. is on the wrong track, 31-62. Of that 62, a big chunk of that are people that actually support the president. That is not a dynamic you want when you are running for re-election. If we look back to February and March, even though the president was trailing, even though he'd been stuck in this rut of kind of low to mid-40s support, you could squint and say, okay, the fundamentals are good, the economy is strong, people approve of the way he's handling certain issues. The problem is all those fundamentals were turned on its head, and so now we are a week out from the election with all those factors working against him. And perhaps the most important thing is that he's running against a relatively generic, benign opponent. Biden is net favorable. People don't feel too strongly one way or another. He spent the spring running against a clown car of national Democrats who are seen to his left and appeared next to them to be pretty middle of the road. That's why he won the election, in fact. And I would say at some levels, almost more surprising that the race is as close as it is. It's a testament to how polarized our country is, how the sort of partisan lanes are pretty clear. And just from a baseline standpoint, it's not to rule out that the president could win, but he needs some combination of a last-minute shift in polling that we've not seen yet, and he needs some significant systemic polling error that was bigger than we saw last time. So far, that none of those things have materialized, but it's something to keep an eye on. As we try to kind of exercise the demons of 2016, I think it's worth being clear-eyed about what actually happened and how that compares to this time. Look, the president was not popular before. He's actually probably more popular than he is now, but he won, despite those poor numbers, by being the lesser of two evils. Of the 20% or so of the country that disliked both President Trump and Hillary Clinton, he won 61% of those in terms of the two-party vote. He won an even bigger proportion in the states that ended up mattering and ended up being at the tipping point. That's the single biggest root of the miss in the polling that we remember. Hillary Clinton got her share of what the polls were saying she should get. The late deciders broke hard for Trump. The people who disliked both broke hard for Trump. You can't really do that against Joe Biden. Not only is he net favorable and significantly more popular than Hillary Clinton, but it took a long, long time to turn Hillary Clinton into the type of person that you could sort of run a pure negative partisanship campaign against. Back in June, I would have said that Trump's campaign had 6 months to change this. Now they have a week. If we listen to the debates, they're flailing around from message to message. They spent a long time talking about Sleepy Joe. That's actually in some ways worked out to Joe Biden's favor when he steps up on stage and strings a few sentences together. Now they've tried to pivot to maybe he's corrupt, Joe. Maybe there's a laptop in here that has some bad things on it. Nothing is stuck, and I think the fact that they're flailing a week out from the election is a testament to how tough of a target Joe Biden has been. And it's particularly as he's been able to run a campaign mostly from his basement. And to the extent this group exists, it's not going to be 20% of the electorate this time, but that smaller group that still exists, Biden's winning them like 7 or 8 to 1. So it's not like you could expect there to be a groundswell toward Trump with that in mind. The other piece of this is to pull off the inside straight that Trump was able to win break through the blue wall. It was precipitated by having Hillary Clinton as a foil. Because the folks in the metro suburbs liked her, but not quite enough. They didn't quite trust her. Trump did well enough to capitalize on the big gains he made in the Rust Belt, particularly with white working class. Biden is able to do two things. That tension, that sort of trade-off of the 2006 election is not a tension anymore. These are both working towards Democrats right now. Biden is been able to build on those affluent metro suburbs, the sort of Whole Foods vote you might think of, but he's also been able to lose the blue-collar whites by less. He's been able to make gains by virtue of being Joe from Scranton, from being the guy who is not looking like AOC, not looking like Bernie Sanders. He's kind of the middle-of-the-road guy. But the one note of caution I would say here, even though as he gains sort of across the board with the key demographics, particularly among whites, it's not quite clear how he's doing with African-American voters or with Hispanic voters. If we see any kind of reversion to the mean, maybe Trump does a little bit better than expected. That's probably why, but it's not clear quite what's going on there. It just doesn't seem like the total revulsion to Trump and the sort of mobilization that we're seeing across the country is as strong in those areas. And so it's just something to keep an eye on. But most importantly, and what we forget about 2016 is how crazy the last month was. And the fact that Donald Trump actually really surged at the end. If I told you that on election day, the polls said that Donald Trump was down 3 and only down 1 point in the battlegrounds, there's no way you would have said that it's a slam dunk. There's no way you would have completely written him off. In some ways, we overlearned the lessons of 2012 and the fact that a close race that looked like Romney was making a go of it ended up not that close. And so, again, we overlearned the lessons of 4 years ago. But if you look on the right, look at that straight line up, the trajectory of Trump closing about a 4 or 5 point gap in the last week or two. That was the fundamental difference in the race. And right now, you can sort of see a little bit of people coming home, but unless that continues for the next week, it's just not going to happen for the president, or you shouldn't expect it to. This is just a look at the national polling. Again, very stable. 7 days out from 2016, Clinton led by 2.2 points. Her final margin was 2.1, so if we assume that a week out, this is pretty predictive. Biden's current lead is about 8 or 9, depending on who you talk to. I think the most important thing, what I've stressed to you as the biggest difference, Biden is above 50%. He's been over 50% this whole time. Even at his low ebb, it was about 47, which is higher than Clinton finished. So, again, this is a time when Trump was surging. He needs to surge over the next week. It's not happening yet. Focus on that share. Hillary was around 45, 46 in all the states that mattered. Biden is on 49, 50 in the places that matter. This is just a look at the Electoral College. I'm not going to go through this a lot. I know we want to get onto scenarios and crystal ball stuff, but I think this is what the colors here is what I point your attention to. The states we expected this election to hinge on, the places we expected to be talking about, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, those are shaded light blue. Those are not that close right now. The closest races in the country are these brown states. It's Iowa, it's Ohio, it's North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas. It's places that should not be close. It's places that the president needs to have in the bag. And so, again, it would require both a surge at the end and really just kind of a systemic polling miss that you shouldn't necessarily expect. But I think the main thing is there's a consistent story to be told, which is the states that were like 8, 9 points last time are actually competitive, which tells you what? There's been about a swing of 6, 7, 8 points, and that's important. There's some sticky states. There's states like Florida and North Carolina that are kind of in the middle there and don't swing all that much. But by and large, you're seeing the swing to move the center of gravity away from the Rust Belt and down to the Sun Belt. Right now, if you just look at the states that matter, These are 179 electoral votes that the president won last time. Biden leads these by 2 points. Trump won these by 4 points last time. That 6-point swing lines up with what we're seeing, which is about an 8-point lead, away from a 2-point Hillary Clinton win last time. What if the polls are wrong? This is the question everybody wants to talk about right now, and I think this look from the New York Times on the left is really instructive. Let's just assume the polls are exactly right. They're probably not, but if they're exactly right, Biden would carry 357 electoral votes, darn near 2008, very close to the 365 that Barack Obama won in 2008. If they miss like they did in 16, that's what everybody wants to talk about. Okay, let's say that they do. Biden still wins 280 electoral votes. That's that middle column. If it's more like 2012, we know these things can happen in both directions. Biden wins 341 electoral votes. He might give back Georgia. There's a couple that are on the cusp, but the point is it won't be that close. It's silly to try to predict the direction of error or the magnitude of error, but the bottom line is, in any event, the only question is this going to be a close race or is it going to be a blowout? Again, polls are fairly accurate in 2016. Don't overthink that. The polls are all telling a consistent story. If we compare the state polls, the national polls, and even down to the district level, there is a steep drop-off in the red areas, and the competition has moved into places that wouldn't be competitive in an environment where Trump was going to win again. Let's just look a little bit at the congressional state of play. Again, we would have expected in a competitive cycle for the president that the GOP would have a pretty decent path. Remember, the 2018 election was a blue wave. There were a lot of inroads made into Trump country. The GOP needs 18 seats. But look at this. This is the list of competitive seats right now. And what they'd have to do, the math is pretty crazy. They'd have to defend everything that's kind of competitive and lean R. They'd have to flip 9 Democratic toss-ups. Okay, fair enough. Maybe they can do that. They need to defend 16 toss-ups that are on their side, and they need to dip into that lean Democrat column, get in 11 from over there, because 2 Republican-held seats are already sort of in that column. Really tough. The way you would make that math work is there's 30 Democratic seats that are run by President Trump. If Trump is competitive again, if those are Trump districts again, Republicans can easily win those. It's no problem, but what would have to happen? The House would have to be moving in tandem with the presidential. If the presidential race is a 3, 4, 5 point race, suddenly all these gains are in the Republican direction. But right now, if the polls are right, Democrats pick up 5 to 15 seats. That seems to be the consensus as it's shaking out. Again, this is the list of those Trump Democrat seats. Given that uniform shift that we're seeing, he might not win, but the top 2 or 3, yeah, he's going to win Colin Peterson's seat in Minnesota 7. But it's really, you can sort of count on one hand of the 30 districts that he has a shot in this time. This is, I would commend to you, if you're on Twitter, follow some of the election Twitter gurus. There are some really good amateur analysis, and I swiped this from them. But of the 69 House races or House districts that we have polling in, 54 of them were won by Donald Trump in 2016. He won these by about 6.3 points. Republicans currently lead, or Trump currently leads in just 20 of them. That's a 10-point swing in the national trend. So again, this is on track with what we're seeing nationally, maybe even worse at the district level. Some of these are internal polls, so you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. But again, it looks like Democrats will add to their House advantage. The real action here is in the Senate because of really the aftershocks of 2014. 2014 was a red wave. It was a cycle where Republicans took back the majority and were able to win really across the map. So just by virtue of the structure of the Senate, 6 years later, of the third of the chamber that's up, they are defending 23 to the Democrats' 12. That means a handful of places we always expected to be competitive, but a lot of places that weren't expected to be competitive. The current balance of power, there's a 3-seat majority, 6, but the Democrats need to net 3 to have a 50-50 tie. The White House would, of course, break that tie. To get 51, they need to net 4. They're going to give back 1 in Alabama, so we just sort of build that into our thinking. There are 2 states where Democrats are, these are blue states that Republicans win in. That's the sort of low-hanging fruit. The other thing to remember here is that in 2016, for the first time in modern history, every Senate race result was in tandem with the presidential result. So that's something to watch. Wouldn't expect a lot of splits. The ticket splitting dynamic has definitely declined in recent years. But again, Trump is the biggest factor here. It's been really hard, particularly in a pandemic environment, for any of these incumbents to make the races about their opponent. It's about one thing. It's about Donald Trump. And that's good for some of them. It's bad for some of them. But the bottom line is right now, depending on which handicapping you're looking at, Democrats are favored to win 49 or 50 seats. So it's really, the majority is right there on the cusp. That goes back to these kind of tiers I'm looking at. And if you look at what used to be the core four, now it's five if we consider Iowa to be a very competitive state now. This is where Democrats can clinch the majority. You would expect them to do it here. These are the sort of up to the 51st seat in Iowa. And again, they're probably favored in three of these. They're probably favored in Colorado, Maine, where it's really tough for Susan Collins to win the 50% that she needs in a ranked choice voting dynamic. Cory Gardner swimming against the tide there, just really tough in an environment where Donald Trump is not doing well. In Arizona, where the president may or may not win Arizona, but Martha McSally, the appointed incumbent there, is facing Mark Kelly, who is just a really tough target for Republicans to hit. We would expect to sort of build that into Democrats' column. There could be some surprises there, but it really comes down to North Carolina and Iowa, two states that were shaded brown on that last map we looked at. I won't go into detail on those, but that's sort of the control comes down to those two states. Another tier, just in terms of those other brown states we were looking at, the ones that Trump is suddenly competitive, maybe shouldn't be competitive in, but states like Georgia, states like Texas, where just the lean of the state has moved into a point where Republicans there have to be a little bit nervous just because you might have some surprises in a blue wave situation. The wild cards here are states like Kansas, states like Montana, states like even Alaska, where the president should win, but he won these states big time by 15, 20 points last time. He's probably only going to win them by single digits. And so you have some unique dynamics in those states, some matchups that create a situation where you could have a surprise or two. But the point is here, structurally, Republicans are in really good shape to hold their losses. If the president does well enough, Republicans can hold their losses down. But if things get ugly, if the polls are right, or perhaps if the polls sort of err in a direction that's favorable to Democrats, it could get really ugly. I tried to game this out a little bit. I think it's a visualization on the right. This is not data-based, but it's kind of a rough rule of thumb. If you somehow reprise the 2016 dynamic, Republicans could hold serve. They could not lose a single seat. They might lose one, but they keep the majority. If it's something like a Mitt Romney scenario, Trump loses by about 4 points, but maybe does a little bit better than the polls say, they can, again, hold the chamber. Maybe they lose 2 seats, perhaps 3, but it's right on the cusp there. It's the Obama situation I talked about. That's sort of, about an 8-point dynamic. That's where, polls are kind of right between there and 10 points, depending on what you're looking at. That's where you start to be cracking into that next tier. Where it gets a little bit crazy is, let's say anything is undercounting the Democratic support. Let's say that the turnout is such that maybe they make gains in places you're not expecting. It could get really, really big, and that's going to have implications in these election scenarios that we're about to talk about. I think the biggest thing that I would point out here is that in Georgia, because of the rules they have there with regard to runoff threshold, we might be looking at either control of the Senate coming down to what happens in January with two Georgia races, or the extent of a Democratic majority coming down to whether they can win in Georgia. This is presumably after Joe Biden has won and the majority is out of the question. So the extent of Democratic wins in the Senate will come down to Georgia, and probably it will come down to January. Let's talk about remaining variables. Look, we've already ruled out a return to normalcy. That's not happening. SCHROEDINGER'S vacancy, we filled that last night. We don't have to worry about that now. It's baked in. Almost more anticlimactic than we would have expected. I think the long tail of the vacancy there is the just absolute gusher of cash that's come into Democratic coffers in the last 2 months. That could have some implications, particularly at the Senate level. There was some chatter at a certain point, well, okay, what if we got some kind of vaccine or therapeutics by Election Day? That clearly hasn't happened or won't happen. Are we going to have some kind of big stimulus that gives the president a big win? That hasn't happened. what else are we looking at? Okay, early vote. I'm not going to get into what that means because I think it's foolish to try to read too much into it. But turnout is huge and could have interesting implications. Right now, Biden is banking votes in places that could matter. Republicans should win the election day vote. We just don't quite know what it means yet. Vote by mail. There's all kinds of interesting things going on with vote by mail now. Some states are getting a huge deluge but can't count until election day. There's open questions as to what happens with the votes that come in postmarked by election day but come in after. There's a big Supreme Court case that just came down on that. So I think vote by mail is something to watch. There's two things going on there. One, if there is a high rejection rate, that could hurt Democrats in the margin. On the other hand, the president has poisoned the well on this to the point where Republicans aren't participating in vote by mail. That's going to hurt them. I talked about the money chase. Undecideds, it's just not a huge pool of voters, but at 5 or 6%, that could matter at the margin, particularly as we're talking about Senate races. Are these people that are sitting on the fence now sitting on the fence because they're not going to vote for Trump, but they're not sure if they're going to vote for Biden? What does that mean for Republicans down ticket? Just hard to say, but I think that's something to watch. It could determine whether this is a close race or the blowout we're talking about. And it's still the last week, but anything can happen. We're past the time frame of a Comey letter, but again, crazier things have happened. Let's look about the range of outcomes. I think the main thing here is let's just bear in mind here anything can happen. Trump can still win. Let's not talk about anything that's unthinkable. If we learned anything in 2006, it's just to keep your mind open, and that works in both directions. Biden's the heavy favorite. It's not clear what kind of coattails he has. I think most likely you're going to get a narrow Senate majority just because of those structural dynamics I talked about in the Senate. Republicans, barring a big Biden win, can probably hold their losses down to maybe 4. But again, it's really slippery. Once they crack past that 52 mark, it could get up to 53, 54, 55. The most likely outcome, if you look at the models, is becoming a big, massive Biden blowout. We'll talk about what that means for policy, but I think that's something we have to start thinking about. If we're thinking about in our back of our mind what happens if Trump wins, we have to think about what the heck happens if Biden wins bigger than anybody could have thought. And again, the crazy turnout opens doors to surprises. We could have the biggest turnout in over 100 years. It could pass 2/3. And it's just really tough to model, and it's tough to pull when everybody's a likely voter. So we could wake up after, it's like waking up after a hurricane and the boat's in a tree over there. We're just going to see things that we aren't necessarily expecting. Trump victory, I'm going to go through this one quickly because I don't think it's something we should spend a whole lot of time talking about. But I think it's interesting to think about, okay, what would this look like? Okay, Trump closes strong in the polls in the final week. He gets a big GDP number here on Thursday, and maybe giant pool tips up. If he's at 46, maybe a few of those people that don't approve him come back to him in the end. There's some weakness, as I said, with POCs with Biden, and we're systematically missing something in the polls. I don't believe that people are lying to pollsters. I don't believe that there's a shy Trump, whatever that means, but I do think there's a case to be made that perhaps people with low social trust that don't answer the phone maybe are more inclined to support Trump, and if we're working backwards, maybe that's what to think about. If he wins, they keep the Senate, they might even pick up the House, but it probably doesn't mean anything for a legislative agenda, just more of the same. Maybe you get more tax cuts, maybe you get a Republican infrastructure package. You're definitely going to have Mitch McConnell confirming more judges. Otherwise, it's just really more of the same. Here's where it gets interesting. A Biden victory, let's just bake that in because that's probably the most likely outcome. But there's a huge difference in the range of possibilities, and I'm sure our panelists will talk about this, but the difference between a Republican Senate and a Biden White House, where they're fighting at all times, keeping him from doing really anything he wants, it restricts his range of motion to really just the things that can be done through executive action, which, to be clear, is a lot of things, but it really hems up that legislative range of possibilities. I think, just from the top, what are the executive actions that can be done on day one? Clearly rejoining the Paris Accords, some doing things on methane, doing things on carbon risk disclosure, social costs of carbon, slowing leasing and permitting on federal lands, aggressive enforcement of the ESA, rolling back the rollbacks of Trump, going back to Obama-era regulation on some of these things. That is day one stuff under any circumstance that should be baked into the future, things I talk about, but it really hems up that legislative agenda and an open question on if he can even get through his cabinet appointees. It's very interesting to see how McConnell would approach that, how Republicans would approach that. Interesting things for like stimulus and that kind of thing. It's just not clear how that would work. Let's say he wins, and the most likely situation right now, which is a narrow Democratic Senate majority. He's going to get his personnel through, but it's a lot harder to get things done without Republican cooperation. And we'll see in the lame duck if bipartisan comity breaks out, but I'm not holding my breath for it. Republicans will wield significant power here, but I think where they need to be careful is they need to choose their battles, because if Republicans block something wildly popular, like a big COVID package or anything else, it's pretty much begging Democrats who really otherwise don't want to nuke the filibuster to go nuclear, people like a Joe Manchin. But again, until then, it would probably be centered around executive actions. What could get done? I think the COVID relief deal definitely gets done. You get some green infrastructure done, maybe. We talk about energy infrastructure, energy innovation spending. That's something that a significant number of Republicans can get on board with. They'll do things via reconciliation, but their options are limited. They could do things on taxes, maybe roll back some of the TCJA issues. You could maybe get a modest climate bill on things that Republicans will go with you on, natural solutions to carbon, things like that. But let's get into a Biden landslide. So I think that's where things are kind of converging on. Let's say they get 53 or more seats, and I don't want to count too high because it just gets crazy there. But Democrats hold all the cards at this point. And I think there is, on paper, Republicans, they can filibuster things, but the minute they try to do it against anything Dems really want, Dems can change the rules. All they need is that simple majority. A significant edge in the upper chamber really just opens the door to anything for energy, anything beyond energy. And at that point, it's not what Joe Manchin wants. It's not what the Senate wants. It's really a question of what Joe Biden wants. And right now, he's keeping his cards pretty close to the vest. And I think it becomes a question of where President Biden wants to lead, what he sees his legacy being. But just big picture, the discussion on doing things with energy, it includes the things I talked about, but you get into a really much bigger spending package, the sort of $2 trillion package that he's talked about on the stump. You're talking about a really principled discussion on clean energy standards, not just a carbon tax. You're even exploring the idea of carbon border adjustment. It really just opens up the universe at that point. I think I want to talk about a little bit before, we're getting short on time, but the filibuster here, it really is the whole ballgame in terms of the Biden agenda. It could really determine what they can do, which is why it's so important to watch these Senate races and see how they come down. A simple majority can change the rules. Manchin and Sinema, among others, have said that they would oppose. Feinstein, she's an institutionalist. She's kind of expressed skepticism. I would say, in light of the recent confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, I do think some of these people that have said they oppose it before have been radicalized in some ways. I think that the norm busting in the Trump era has really greased the skids for some of the stuff to get done. But again, it can't come down to what a Joe Manchin wants. It can't come down to what a Cal Cunningham or whoever gets elected to the Senate wants. It has to be too big. I think the minute that Democrats want something and Republicans stand in the way, it's something that has popular support, something that has consensus on the Democratic side, the filibuster is probably gone. They're not going to change the rules to change the rules, but if Republicans blockade COVID relief, Voting Rights Act, statehood, things like that, it could open the door to bigger things, not Green New Deal type things, but things that are bigger than even what we're talking about right now. And I would say as Republicans are thinking about their strategy, they have to pick their battles because they could make it very easy for Democrats to make this decision. Very quickly, because I want to turn it back over to the panel, this is just a look at who the key players would be. Lisa Murkowski is term limited as chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. That'll be John Barrasso, because Barrasso moves over from the EPW. Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia moves over to EPW. There is some musical chairs going on with some of the House ranking members, so keep an eye on that. These are your players, I think, on the tax side, which will be informing a lot of your energy-related decisions. Mike Crapo is sliding over to the finance gavel there, and so those are just all new players that you should keep your eye on as we're talking about what it might look like. I don't want to get into the Biden administration, what decisions he might make, but he has talked about making a climate czar cabinet level. There's been chatter about maybe being John Kerry or something like that, but these are the types of people that are going to be interacting with congressional leaders, and that is all I have. I know I don't have time for questions and comments, but I commend you to check out. We'll have a analysis on this when the dust settles the day after the election, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Lisa, I'll turn it back over to you, and I hope I didn't chew up too much. Thank you very much.
No, Liam, that was amazing. And yes, there's a ton in there, and I'm very grateful that you're willing to share this presentation with our participants. So thank you very much. I am going to go ahead now and share my slides. And we're going to transition to our panel now. I think I'm going to keep myself off video, but I invite our panelists when they're speaking to turn their video on. But I'd ask all attendees to keep yourself muted as you have been, thank you, and also keep your cameras off just so that we have the opportunity to see the panelists when they're speaking. So again, we have with us today Emily Duncan, Chair of the BCSC Board of Directors, and also with National Grid US, Nanette Lockwood, Senior Director for Climate Policy and Advocacy at the Center for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability at Trane Technologies. We've got Chris Matthey, Vice President of Government Relations for Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, Malcolm Wolf, President and CEO of the National Hydropower Association, and Jim Rathall, General Counsel with New Energy Equity LLC. I'd like to just hop into it and get started. I'd like to ask the first question to Malcolm and Chris. I'd like to just do a check first, just to make sure Malcolm is with us. Malcolm,
yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Yay. Okay. Well, all right. You get the first question. You just had the opportunity to hear what Liam shared. What are your sector's policy priorities, looking both at later this year in a lame duck session and towards 2021?
Yeah, it's thanks, Lisa, and thanks for putting together this event. It's unclear to me how much we can really expect from a lame duck session, particularly if there is a blue wave. I'm not sure the incentives to necessarily do things other than pass. The two things would be the COVID relief and the budget, but I think a lot may get bumped down the road. From a hydro industry perspective, it's interesting. There's actually a lot of opportunities for the hydro industry either way the election goes. President Trump has pursued a deregulatory agenda, and there's a whole host of advantages for the hydro industry, particularly on siting and relicensing. So things along the lines of Clean Water Act reform and ESA reform and NEPA reform really have some benefits for the industry. They have been finalized in this rule. They're at the courts, so that's going to be one area of opportunity if President Trump wins re-election. On the other hand, Vice President Biden has emphasized climate change, and as a zero carbon flexible technology, the hydro industry has a lot to benefit from that as well. So for us, kind of climate change and really kind of parity in grid in how we're treated with other clean energy technologies are our top priorities for the next administration.
Thanks, Malcolm. Chris, hello. Hopefully you are with us.
How are you?
I'm well.
Yep.
What are your thoughts from Chris's perspective? What are your policy priorities looking both at this year and towards next year?
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks, BCSC and CEBN for hosting this event. And like you just said, I thought Liam's presentation was amazing. Happy to be here representing Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. If you're not familiar with our group, we're a right-of-center organization that's focused on expanding clean energy across the U.S., working with Republicans and conservatives to really lean in on climate energy solutions and taking that challenge and really turning it into an opportunity. We support in all of the above approach and believe that the best way to really tackle this challenge is through market-based policies. In terms of like the near term, as Malcolm just said, I think lame ducks are always hard to predict, and this one may be even harder to predict than other ones, which would just dovetail with everything we've experienced this year with COVID, et cetera. It could be a really productive session. There's a lot of great, well-vetted, bipartisan, common sense bills that are out there, like the American Energy Innovation Act. It's a bill that Chair Murkowski, is authored along with a number of other of her colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We had hoped to see it pass back in the spring. It got a little bit waylaid and sidelined by some other issues, HFCs, et cetera. But it enjoys broad bipartisan support, and it's got a lot of really great emphasis on innovation and R&D type initiatives, which are critical to accelerating the clean energy transition. So highly supportive of that. I think tax extenders, obviously this time of year, that's always something that's going to be in consideration. Hopefully they do it this year. Don't do it next year and make it retroactive this year. Obviously, the stuff for the clean energy tax credits, ITC, PTC, et cetera, this year are incredibly important. The sector's been hard hit with COVID, and we've had some positive developments with regard to, from Treasury on safe harbor. But I think looking at extensions and almost treating this year as kind of a lost year is probably what's going to happen with regard to those specific tax policies. And then the other thing we're actually trying we're focused on from a CREZ perspective is actually the National Defense Authorization Act. Just in case, kind of maybe as a hedge of AEIA not moving, certain provisions like the Nuclear Energy Leadership Act, the BEST Act, Use It Act, et cetera, have been kind of parsed out from that and put into that package. And obviously, for I think almost the last 60 years, we've passed an annual defense authorization bill. So hopefully that's a vehicle that will move. That's kind of our near-term priorities. I'll be happy to chat later on about what we're focused on in 2021, regardless of the outcome of the election. But again, from our perspective, it's about expanding clean energy. It's about giving an opportunity for Republicans to really lean in on climate solutions, and really dispelling the myth that conservatism is incompatible with good climate policy.
Well, thank you, Chris. A lot in there. I appreciate you sharing, and I do hope we can come back and get some more thoughts on next year from CREZ's standpoint. But next, I'd like to please go to Emily Duncan to get us focused on the BCSE's coalition recommendations for energy and climate change policy that were released today. I was just hoping that you could start, we'll hear from a few other of our panelists as well, but what are the elements that you would like to highlight that are critical from National Grid's perspective in terms of advancing your policy priorities?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa, and thanks for having me. As an investor-owned utility in the Northeast, we serve about 7 million customers. And I think what we really appreciate about the BCSE statement and enjoyed working with BCSE on it is because of the inclusive approach, right? I mean, there's really kind of three things that I'd highlight out of the statement that are in line with National Grid. I think first is, National Grid has embraced a net zero ambition by 2050. And so like BCSE, we're looking at a wide range of solutions, right? So we're looking at energy efficiency, we're looking at decarbonizing our natural gas system, interconnecting large-scale renewables. We're very aggressive about expanding our charging network for the electrification of transportation. We've already started piloting battery storage projects in Nantucket and on Long Island. And so appreciate kind of the bevy of options that are out there and BCSE embracing all of those options. I think the second thing I'd point out is that, at National Grid, we recently released our Responsible Business Charter. And so another piece of the statement that I want to highlight is BCSE's call that the energy workforce of the future really needs to reflect the diversity of our country. And National Grid certainly supports that. For our part, we're going to be very focused on our lower income communities and figuring out ways to provide access to education and skills development opportunities with the goal of reaching 45,000 people by 2030 with those programs. And then the third thing I'd point out is BCSE's role and push to improve the existing energy system. I mean, that really resonates with National Grid's ambitions. Rather than scrapping our existing far-flung and heavily invested existing distribution system, are there ways that we can green it? Are there ways that we can reduce emissions, improve resilience, and keeping an eye on benefiting our customers and also keeping costs down, right? Making it affordable. And so in the Northeast, we have some of the oldest pipelines in the country. And so we've undertaken an aggressive leak-prone pipe replacement program that's led to about a 15% reduction in methane emissions in our distribution system just over the past 5 years. And we're kind of at a rate now where we're replacing about 400 miles of leak-prone pipe on an annual basis. And then the second thing I'd point to is hydrogen, right? We really see a major role for hydrogen in greening our gas system moving forward. And so I've been participating in a hydrogen blending study in conjunction with NYSERDA and Stony Brook University. And so I think those three aspects of the statement, one, the inclusivity of technologies, the inclusivity of people, and diversifying our energy workforce for the future, and then finally improving on the existing system, are all things that I'd highlight in the statement and that National Grid certainly supports.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you for your leadership too as chair of the BCSC. I'd like to invite a couple other board members that are also panelists to see if they have any comments. Nanette Lockwood, are you with us? I have a few questions for you, Nanette, but first let me just ask you if you have anything that you wanted to share related to the recommendations BCSC released today.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate the opportunity. And of course, I agree with Emily and appreciate her leadership. Trane Technologies has a gigaton challenge, which focuses on reducing our customers' emissions by 1 billion metric tons by 2030. So we really need to see stronger demand for low carbon technologies and systems. So specifically, what we're looking for is that the U.S. has got to send better market signals that prioritize a lower carbon future, with a focus on things like sustainability, affordability, energy efficiency, safety, resiliency, and reliability. Those are the things that our customers expect. Those are the things that they're asking for today. And we really need to send signals that make sense. And so in order to do this, the policy discussion has got to gravitate to sound science. Especially as the rest of the world pursues compliance with their commitments under the Paris Agreement and compliance with the HFC phase down under the Montreal Protocol. The private sector responds well to government direction, and we're already making science-based targets in line with the Paris Agreement. So until the U.S. takes action, companies like ours are developing low-carbon solutions for other markets. This puts American technology leadership at risk. So we really need to see the U.S. step up and start, putting a line in the sand.
Thanks, Nanette. Let me first go. I'm going to come back to you in a moment with another question. But Malcolm, do you have any comments on the statement that you'd like to highlight?
Sorry, just restarting my video here. No, I think the statement is great. I think it really reflects the wonderful umbrella that BCSC creates, whereby we can kind of promote all forms of sustainable energy. And I particularly like the BCSC emphasis on equity and inclusion. I think that is something that the industry, the energy industry at large, does not do a good enough job on. And we need our industry to look like our customers, and we're not there yet. And I think that there needs to be a whole lot more emphasis on that as well. So I'm glad to see that kind of emphasized as part of climate, as part of the other priorities for BCSC.
Thanks, Malcolm. So Nanette, coming back to you, thinking about the comments that Leah made and some of the policy ideas that Malcolm and Chris just discussed. I mean, there are a number of issues we've been working on for a significant amount of time. But, there definitely has been a change. And I was wondering if you could share from your perspective, what changes have you seen in the policy agenda? And when you look out to 2021, what opportunities might there be?
So I think we're seeing things that we haven't seen in a long time, where the federal government has not really provided direction, and so the states are taking over. And so things that we've been working on for a long time, energy efficiency, lower carbon electricity, vehicle emissions, that's all being done in the states now. And it's creating a real patchwork. But it is really demonstrating a focus on the fact that these issues are resonating with consumers across the board. It's become bipartisan on really all of the issues. We saw for the first time, we saw bills in both chambers really on the HFC phase down, and it was equally balanced. And so I think we're really moving some of these issues forward. They're just having a tough time getting harmonization. And so the states are taking over. But I feel like at this point, as Congress, becomes, as we go into a new Congress, we're really looking at issues that the states have taken charge on. We have 16 states that have taken action on HFCs. And that really demonstrates the fact that we will need to do something at the federal level to harmonize, just to make sure that we maintain our technology leadership. So I really feel like there are a lot of issues that have moved for a long time that are now crossing the aisle.
Right. Well, I think, as Chris said, things that are within the American Energy and Innovation Act. There's a lot of conversation in Washington about clean energy standards, which, when we look at what's going on with renewable portfolio standards or energy efficiency resource standards or clean energy standards at the state level, I think, what you just said means that there are a number of issues for a variety of reasons that might be on the agenda under any election scenario. So,
Lisa, can I chime in real quickly?
Yeah, of course, Chris.
This is Chris. Hey, just real quickly, to your point, I think you're absolutely right that things have changed, and not only just on the policy side, but I think on the political side. And I think, the thing that we're most excited from a CRES perspective is we really believe we are at an inflection point, and you're starting to see more and more Republicans engage and offer, climate solutions and focus on the outcomes. And I think that, the debate now is no longer about the science. I think the deniers have really been kind of marginalized. And now it's about the approach, and that's what I'm excited about. That we don't have to debate, whether climate exists or humans are contributing to it. Recent polls that we've conducted as an organization show that 55% of Republicans believe that it's a serious problem that needs to be addressed. And so now we can talk about the approach, and is it a big government approach like a Green New Deal, or is it more of a market-based approach that really focuses on investing in innovation and commercializing new clean technologies, hydrogen, advanced nuclear, et cetera. And so that's why I really feel like we're at this pivotal time, and really, regardless of the election outcome, looking forward to having this dialogue in the 117th Congress. But the politics has definitely shifted and for the better.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. Well, I'd like to bring in Jim Rathall to the conversation. Jim, I've got a couple of questions for you. Going back to what Emily highlighted in the BCSC recommendations document that was put out today, there's an emphasis on, workforce development, inclusion, diversity. Just taking a step back, tell us a little bit about how you've seen, clean energy employment change over the past several years, and then how is the current business environment impacting your industry and job creation?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, and so just a little background on New Energy Equity. We're a national renewable energy developer and equity finance company. We have over $450 million in capital invested in 26 different states, and we're really on the ground with a lot of the issues we're talking about here. There's no doubt that COVID has had an impact. Wood McKinsey estimated about a 10% reduction since the pandemic. But we're still on track for 33% year-over-year growth in the industry. We're growing strongly. Our company's growing, our partners, and we see lots going on in the States. So the job creation and economic opportunity is still right there. And I guess in terms of the recommendations, we focused on the financial incentive piece, the low-hanging fruit, what Chris was talking about. The ITC is a tremendous driver, and we need to develop projects to take advantage of it. We see thousands of new projects and tens of thousands of new jobs that would absolutely happen just if we can get that ITC extension and the direct access policy put in place. So we think that too should be absolutely bipartisan. These are red states and blue states. The strong economic and consumer benefits from cheaper electricity, as well as meeting environmental goals. So we think that's one of the first orders of business and absolutely something that across the aisle everybody should be supporting.
So that's a good segue into the second part of my question, and I'm going to go also to hear from some of the other companies in a moment. But we often on these conversations, we talk generally about the business state of play, and then we talk about our priorities from a policy perspective. But what I think a lot of times either policymakers or other stakeholders miss is kind of that middle part, like how does it really work, and like why would that benefit you? So just from your standpoint, maybe you can just share, how will policy success impact your business and help create jobs?
Yeah, and I think what's great about the ITC as a lever is that it lowers the cost of capital and it has a direct impact on generating more activity, which in turn, increases the employment. If you're thinking about the tens of billions of dollars in federal stimulus and recovery money and relief money that's going out there to businesses and farms and, all well intended, but what's it generating? With the kind of energy policies, including the ITC, you're going to get economic activity and jobs in return, and good quality jobs in the places where we need them. So, the ITC is a starting point. Broader energy policies, I think we saw after the 2008 financial crisis, tremendous success in things like the DOE loan and grant programs that, contrary to some of the criticisms, those actually not only, boosted lots of new industries and created jobs, but made profit for the federal government. So we see that with the blue wave you're talking about, sort of the sky's the limit with making the next decade, a clean energy decade for the country, and tremendous economic benefits along with that.
Thanks, Jim. Well, I'd love to get some comments from Emily and Nanette on that. Again, how will policy success impact your company and job creation that it might provide?
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. Just jumped in there. I love this question, right? What does success look like? And I think, first it's policies that incentivize the growth of new industries, right? So we've talked about the ITC. I think another item that we certainly support is an expansion of the electric vehicle tax credit. We've also been successfully injecting renewable natural gas into our system since 1981. We'd love to see some incentivization around renewable natural gas and a recognition that it's a part of our kind of renewable future. And I think also policies that are inclusive and not prescriptive, right? Let's not take anything off the table. Let's continue to look at all kinds of resources to try to meet these goals. And I think part of that is investing in R&D for the technologies we'll need to meet our 2050 aspirations. What else is out there? What else can we be investing in and studying to see, how it can be part of the solution moving forward and for this clean energy transition. So I think those are kind of things that will certainly help from a policy perspective, help us achieve our ambitions.
Thank you, Nanette.
Sure, Lisa, and I would agree. Success looks like, demand for low carbon technologies, demand for clean energy. And as we progress towards that, we have technologies out there. A lot of customers don't understand, what they need. And there's no real goal for them on an emissions standpoint. So everything turns to a pricing discussion. And it's difficult to be sort of a leader in low carbon technologies and try to educate all the consumers at the same time, right? So if we are successful in a policy, we're going to see a real signal that consumers will respond to and that industry can then focus on. If we're focused on low carbon technologies, then we no longer have to worry about one state versus another state, keeping the old technologies around because they're less expensive. And we can focus on truly distributing all of these technologies globally and really preserving American leadership. So for our company, it would allow us to meet our targets, transform an industry that can then actually significantly reduce emissions globally.
Thanks, Nanette, for sharing that. And, we're about to close. We just have a minute or so left. Did anybody have a quick closing comment that they would like to make?
This is Chris. Lisa, I would just say, kind of buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be, I think, a fun ride. Hopefully we'll know on November 4th kind of the outcome of both the presidential as well as the Senate and the House, although we may not. I think climate is going to be, a priority for in the blue wave scenario. The one thing I would say is it could be climate by 1,000 cuts. And what I mean by that is if we do have, the town turns blue with the Biden administration, blue Senate, as it relates to climate, I think we have really talked about it comprehensively in over a decade since Waxman Markey. So I think they're going to want to build a legislative record. So I think you could see out of the gate more emphasis on putting various climate provisions, clean energy provisions, and an infrastructure package and a COVID stimulus, type package. And then, whatever they haven't done, that maybe would be the down payment. Then we have to wait and see what the numbers in the Senate are. And do they try to do something through reconciliation and get rid of the filibuster? But obviously, I think climate and clean energy is front and center like never before. It's an exciting time.
Thank you, Chris. And, that's probably a good opportunity to close, but I would like to call out the Bracewell Policy Resolution Group's webinar that they are having on November 4th, and we're happy to distribute information about that webinar. I know I'll be on it bright and early, hopefully gotten some sleep the night before, but I know it will be very informative for whatever the state of the election is. So I encourage you to check it out. I also want to, again, thank Liam and his team at Bracewell for participating in this webinar and being a partner with us on this webinar. I want to thank Clean Energy Business Network. I'd like to thank Krez and Natixis again for their support of this series. And we will have another Powering Forward webinar later this year, looking at giving our own take on how the election evolved and what that meant for our sectors. So probably several weeks after the election, but we will be having one. So please keep your calendars open when that invitation comes around. And then just finally, really proud that the BCSE Coalition released its recommendations for energy and climate change policy today. And I encourage everyone to read them and share your feedback with BCSE. And our website where you can see those recommendations is www.bcse.org. So with that, I'm going to conclude today's Powering Forward webinar. Thank you again for all the attendees for your time. And I especially want to thank our panelists. So I'm going to give you a round of applause.